Hello, we finally meet again. What a strange couple of weeks it's been. I didn't intend to leave you this long. Life happens. All sorts of unpleasantness. But let's not dwell on the past. Let's look ahead to the future of SCP Cafe. Welcome to week 45 and what will likely be the single strangest episode of SCP Cafe that I have ever put out there, and likely ever will. Man. I don't know where to begin, man. There is a lot to talk about. An absolute ton of shit has gone on in the last 2 weeks. Some of it really good, some of it really bad. Before we get there, I suppose I should reintroduce myself. I'm your host, Blue Soul, SCP Wiki moderator, chat administrator, former subreddit moderator, current author, current loving husband, current dog petter, current clone aficionado, and Tottenham Hotspur supporter, despite it all. And man with far too much on his plate, hoping for a little break. So let's start with the beginning. Where the heck have I been? Where's week 43? Where is week 44? So I have tried to put the word out in the channels that I'm able to. That is to say, the subreddit, our SCP Cafe, as well as the Patreon page, patreon.com/SCP Cafe, to try to keep people in the loop, but I'm fully aware that a lot of you aren't keeping track of the show through either of those means, so this will be probably your first update on what all has transpired. Wednesday, October 23rd, I got home from work with my dog. It's around, what time was it? I want to say it was around 5:30. I get in, and we're both happy to be home. He's his usual cheerful self. I go to start making his food, and out of nowhere, he lets out a terrible cry, a terrible yelp of pain. And I look down. I'm not stepping on him or anything. He's a few feet away from me and scrambling away, but he doesn't look quite right. He looks like something's wrong with his foot. So I get down on my knees, I go try and check him out, and I realize his back legs are not working at all. He has no ability to fire them. They're not doing a damn thing he wants them to do, and he's in a great deal of pain and stress, and now I'm in a great deal of stress too. This is totally out of the blue. So I call my wife, and I tell her she's on the way home too. I tell her, don't make any side trips. I need you to come home as soon as possible. Munchkin's back legs don't work. I don't know what's going on. I start calling vets. It's not a great time, as this is right around when a number of vet offices start closing for the day. And I get told, the first few places, sorry, either we're closing or we don't have an opening for the next 4 hours. So I end up finding a place back the way I came, back in Albuquerque. We get there after Diane gets home, and this is a super stressful thing, trying to figure out how to get him in the car without hurting him or making the situation worse. But we manage, and we get to the vet, and they try to take a look. He is trembling the whole drive down, and they take him back, and they start doing some things, and their opinion is that there's something neurological going on, and there is nothing they can do themselves except try to get us a referral to a specialist back in the opposite direction, back the way towards the house, that works with this sort of thing and actually is open at nights as needed for emergencies such as this. So we do that. We head back the way we came, and they check him out, and they go, we've got a few ideas of what it could be. It could be a ruptured disc in his back that is compressing the spinal cord and making it so he can't use his legs. It could be a spinal stroke, in which case this is going to be the state of things likely for the rest of his life. Or there could be some other things going on of a degenerative nature in his back. So with that, happy news, they basically say they want to take him overnight and keep an eye on him, and first thing in the morning begin an MRI and see what they can see. So we agree to that. They keep him, and that was how my Wednesday went. On Thursday, we get the call bright and early that the neurologist's first strongest gut feeling was right on the mark. He had suffered a compressive disc rupture in his back, and basically one of the discs just sort of burst, and there was some of the disc stuff pressing into his spine and making it so, all that shit doesn't work. So the MRI had it right. It confirmed it. They roll him straight into surgery, and we don't, they basically have him for like 4 hours. So we get a call saying it went okay. He is out of surgery, but it is quite intensive, this recovery process, so we're going to be hanging on to him for a couple of days. So the rest of the day, Thursday, we don't see him. Friday, we don't see him. And finally, we do take the time on Friday to try and, dog-proof the house as well as we can, get rid of things that he might want to jump on or climb on or whatever. And on Saturday, we get him back. The thing is, we didn't fully understand what his recovery was going to look like. He was a great deal away from being independently mobile, let's say. He had no strength in his legs. He has no coordination in his legs. So altogether, he is totally helpless. He is not capable of doing anything on his own. So we all of a sudden have to figure out, oh my God, how do we take care of him? We both work. How are we going to do this? And basically, the other issue, I'll come back to that. The other issue was the bill for the surgery, which ended up being just under $9,000 and brings his total of veterinary expenses this year to just about $13,000 for the year. So on top of the how do we pay for all this, it's the how do we care for him. And basically, my wife and I both, took as much time off as we could. She had to do this like combination of work from home and annual leave and administrative leave, and I'm just trying to do straight work from home stuff. And we get through the first week, and every day looks a little bit better than the day before, but it left no time for anything. One of us was within arm's reach of him 24 hours a day up until this past Saturday, and that was from the 25th on to what was Saturday, like the 10th, the 9th. So that left me really zero time to do cafe or really do anything except try to, care for him and keep the family together, as it were. So as of this past Saturday, I was probably the most marked improvement so far. the week prior, he overexerted himself on Saturday. He thought he was doing better than he was. He tried to go on a longer, stumbly sort of walk in which we support him with a sling, basically, that goes around both his back legs. And it was painful to watch, man. And also painful on the back, trying to stoop down to the level to have this work appropriately. But on Friday, last Friday, things were sufficiently good that I didn't use the sling at all. And he has not had to use the sling since then. So where we're at now today's Tuesday, November 12th, he is able to walk under his own power. He's still doesn't have all the coordination. It is a little bit like watching a drunken toddler that's really excited about everything because he's not in any pain. That was the other fun part, was managing his pain involved. Let's see. We had to give him medicine at 5 a.m., 7 a.m., 10 a.m., 1 p.m., 6 p.m., and 9 p.m. It was a lot. I don't ever want to do it again. But we got it. We're through. He's sitting just by my feet here, looking up at me, wondering why I'm talking about him so much. So, what else has gone on? How have you been? We've got other things that have transpired in the last 2 weeks. The big thing today would be the news on the resurgence of SCP Russia and their issues with a copyright troll, basically abusing a very lax system of Russian trademarks and trying to do all this in a position to sell merch. And not just sell merch, their newest thing is that they want to be made an administrator of the Russian wiki so they can more effectively sell their merch. Where we're at now is we are basically, and I say we to be the English wiki staff. I'm not myself a part of this team, working in conjunction with SCP-RU to file suit against this man, and that is going to be an incredibly important ordeal for all of us. So I will keep you guys informed on how that goes. The big thing that will come up is that the wiki will be soliciting donations directly to fund this the legal proceedings. This is a first. The wiki has never solicited donations directly for any cause before. So to give you an idea of how important this is, this is probably there's no probably about it. This is the single biggest threat to the wiki's existence that it has ever faced, and I hope I can sufficiently impart upon you the gravity of things. If this does not go well, it could very well be the end of the wiki, because nobody that I know of is willing to stay on if this guy gets what he wants. So what do you do? Salt the earth? Give him an empire of shit to rule over. And I wish I knew how it's going to go. I'm optimistic from the conversations I've had, but we're all, at the same time, I'm not a part of it, and all I can really do is hope for the best. Like I said, I will keep you apprised of the situation and what's developing there, and how you can donate to that legal fund if you are willing and able. The other thing that has gone on today is I accepted a new position. I have a new job coming on December 9th. I will begin there. I'm really excited. This is going to be stuff that is really interesting to me. I'm really fascinated by it. And it's also stuff that my experience and exposure to it will directly benefit the wiki as we look to the future for migration, for building new architecture and applications for everybody to use. So it has a lot to recommend for it. There's also a good sized little pay bump to it as well. The flip side is that I will be a fair bit busier for a couple of weeks. I don't intend to let this slip again, if it's at all possible. I was really trying to record on Friday when Munch was, basically tied up at the neurologist, and I wasn't going to be able to do anything for him anyway. But at the same time, I was just not mentally there. I was not mentally checked in. I hadn't done any reading. And for that matter, it's been such a train wreck these last 2 weeks. I still don't feel sufficiently prepared for this week 45 show, but we're going to do it. We're going to do the best we can and talk about a few articles that happened in week 45. I will go back as time permits and recap week 43 and 44. I say as time permits. I do have 2 weeks off in between the end of the one job and the start of the other. I intend to use a good chunk of that time recording content. And if I can make those 2 weeks happen in there, that would be phenomenal. I would love that. Not to mention a new little thing I have coming up that I will go into greater detail about in week 46, which, God willing, I will have recorded in its usual time, Friday evening. All that said, thank you for your patience. Let's get into week 45. Week 45 was sort of an odd week. We only had 8 in scope, so I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them. And I'm going to do that for a couple of reasons. The first is 8 is sort of an awkward number when I want to look at 5 or 6 articles. I've got, 2 or 3 left over, and people tend to, well, I don't know, I feel bad. I don't want to say people resent it, but I feel as though people may resent if I didn't cover them with that much, only having 2 or 3 to go. The other reason is that, in all honesty, I wasn't particularly feeling any of these. Every one of these was a no vote for one reason or another. So apologies to everyone. It could very well just be that I'm still not in the correct mental state. Some of them I don't think I really get. Some of them I don't think that I was like the target audience. Whatever the reason, none of them really landed with me this week. So we're going to talk about all of them. But rather than the typical recap format, I'm going to do something closer to like a high-level synopsis and go over the article from more of a structural perspective and then give my thoughts on it in that context instead. So we're going to begin with SCP-4685, titled Every Man Must Pay His Due by It's Denali. This is their first time on the show since week 3 with SCP-4870. So to give a synopsis or an elevator pitch of this thing, what we have is an anomalous crane that, and this is like a mechanical crane, like construction equipment, that appears 13 minutes prior to the death of an individual, specifically at a Foundation site. Once that person dies, the crane extends its arm and goes and picks up the body. And our twist is that at some point in the examination of this thing, it phases through a site and goes through some chambers that have active Scranton reality anchors, and what we see is that the actual crane arm is constructed of flesh and fat and bones and scraps of clothing, all condensed into the shape of a crane arm. And we had in this article a little HTML insert that basically you could click and it would tell you that the crane has been seen and you need to go into lockdown. So on its face, you could take that pitch and take it in a number of directions. The biggest one for me is we are specifically saying that this thing shows up around Foundation sites, and that means that it has some awareness to it. And I don't think we do quite enough with that premise. The little HTML gimmick that this thing did have, which has since been removed in an edit, I don't think even then was really enough to sort of convey fear, because as from the perspective of the reader, you are aware, even, no matter how much you're suspending disbelief, or trying to immerse yourself in this, you know that since this thing only shows up around Foundation sites and you yourself are not, going to be around one anytime soon, it doesn't really give you anything to worry about. If this thing had instead shown up and the pitch was that it is sort of a harbinger of death for some person within visual range of it, that might be the sort of thing that you can sort of impress upon the reader's worldview. So then they see cranes and they sort of think of this piece. But that wasn't what we ended up doing with the piece. We spend a lot of time talking about the protocol for handling how we handle the thing showing up, and it is basically it's a very redundant little section, and I suspect this was sort of a remnant that was more coherent when we had the little HTML footer thing. But as it is now, this Bethpage protocol, I don't think really makes sense to include at this point. There's nothing in here that you couldn't just expand in a sentence or two in the containment procedures. We spent some time talking about how the crane only shows up and only claims bodies that were basically victims of circumstance, whether they were due to accidents or attacks from other anomalies or even health complications. And then we have a big table of things we've tried to do to interact with this thing in some way, up to and including actually trying to knock the thing over, which seems unlike us to try as like the third thing in this table, and this is an abridged list as well. Altogether, what we have in the piece is a lot of things that feel disconnected, because you've got, it only shows up at Foundation sites for Foundation accidents, and it phases through solid matter, and it's, shows up exactly 13 minutes, not 13 minutes and 1 second, not 12 minutes, 59 seconds, exactly 13 minutes prior. We have all of these pieces that by themselves feel like sort of horror tropes, but we don't combine them or connect them in a way that is compelling to the reader. When you think about this article from like a narrative perspective, and you think of it in terms of action and rising and falling action, we don't have any. The thing basically stays at one speed throughout, and that makes this a very dry read. The closest thing we have is this reveal at the end that, the arm appears to be made of flesh, and, blood dripped from this arm during its fleshy state. We're testing it for DNA, but we just leave it there. Like, those results are pending. Like, oh, okay. Well, thanks for telling us that, we saw something and we don't know what to make of it. Altogether, it's a little too disconnected. If there was a deeper meaning or something to connect all of this stuff, I don't think it really came through in the execution. So all that said, this was a no vote for me. Moving on, SCP-4829, titled Umbryo by Werillium, The elevator pitch that we have here is that we're setting this in the far future. We preface it that we are in the middle of studying it, like we're just kind of collecting info on it. And our skip is one of the moons of Uranus, and we have an exploration log where we go out, and one of our guys goes and steps onto the surface and basically melts. Spacesuit dissolves, and we have this big catastrophe as the planet, or the moon, I should say, basically cracks and splits into two. And the punchline here is that it keeps dividing, and we basically have our intrepid Foundation agent has become a sperm, and this moon is undergoing mitosis. And our twist at the end is that we observe a rhythmic thing akin to a heartbeat, and we end the article there. So on its face, there's, not much wrong with the pitch, and the article's quite short, so I've basically given you most of the goods here. We have a little bit of further exposition that, it's dividing, it's still dividing, and an interesting thing where sort of the orbit of the moon has decayed such to the point that it falls into one of the rings of Uranus, and then we sort of go into that where it's got a heartbeat thing. Nothing altogether wrong with it. The trouble I have with it is that it is not possible for me to suspend disbelief on this for whatever reason. It's and it's rough because you've got an idea like this. You really do have to sort of rely on the reader to be able to fucking get over it and, put that disbelief on the shelf. But I find that I can't with this piece. It could just be the length of it is kind of working against it because it is so short. And even doing something like a new theme like Ad Astra might make a difference. The visual appearance is like, oh, okay, we're doing this, this futuristic thing. We've got, the space AG purple stuff on it. Little things like that for the sake of immersion, especially when you are trying to get into a far future skip, I think can make a big difference, because that's really my only hang up with it is like, it's a fun story, but I never feel anything other than that I'm being told a story. I don't feel really anything else aside from that. There's like, this isn't really ever going to affect me, so maybe that's an issue with it as well. But they're not always going to affect you. But the tackling how to properly suspend disbelief is something that I don't think anybody else has really talked about in the comments for it. So it could just be me and my the nature of how I'm taking this thing right now. But it's a good piece. It gets in, hits you, and gets out. And it, in that regard, it did what it was supposed to do. But I'm not so enamored with it really that I want to give it a +1. There's nothing wrong with it to the point that I want to give it a -1. So that's where it's at as a no vote. Moving on, SCP-4509, The Windigo Cold Cases by Dr. Annoying Dog. Our pitch for this would be that we're tying in to Parawatch. They've got stories about the Wendigo, which is a Native American a little bit of folklore that we've taken a little bit of creative license with in this piece. Anyway, the Wendigo is been tied to some murders, in the area of campers on this little, shit island and up in the Great Lakes. And a couple of agents go in and they interview a park ranger, and is like, is it, we want to know about the Wendigos. Like, nah, the Wendigos aren't doing it. It's the gnome. And I know it was the gnome because I killed it and I burned its body. And Foundation goes, tries to explore, and they find a burned area And the punchline is the same park ranger says, well, it wasn't the Wendigo, it was the gnome, because the gnome chased all the Wendigos off and then started attacking the campers. And we kind of end it there. So it's an odd sort of piece, because the most recent comment on it kind of sums up my feelings with it. It's like, well, it ended right as it was getting started. So I think that's a fair criticism to level at it, that we spend a lot of time here with our build-up, and these logs are then kind of silly, and it sort of ends with, you just sort of going, good joke, but is that really a sufficient amount of payoff for the time we put into it? I mean, we have this sort of ominous line at the end from the ranger saying, I suggest you to get on the first boat out of here. You wasted the only hospitality the island was willing to give you, but we don't do anything with it. We go straight to the final addendum saying, well, this person's now a POI, investigation is ongoing. We, had an opportunity there to escalate the action. We didn't do it. Further back in the piece, we've got this big table of all the different disappearances, and but we don't do really anything at all with it. So it's not everything it could be, and I think that's my biggest problem with it. Is I think there was probably an interesting premise. You've got a good character here, and we don't do enough with the stuff that we've set up. So what we end up with is a punchline that feels kind of lacking, because it was sort of I don't want to say it was the easiest thing you could do, because that's not fair at all. It was an insufficient amount of resolution, if that makes sense. And, you don't always get a happy ending or a completed story, and I'm fully aware of that. But given how much time occurs in between the final sighting and the transcripts, we've got like 3 years in between these. It doesn't make a lot of sense for the thing to be constructed the way it is at the end. Because beyond this, mild amusement, I don't feel anything at all with this piece. We maybe had an opportunity, since we're, bringing in Parawatch. We could have, maybe I don't know, do we reframe this from a Parawatch point of view? Maybe not. But what we've got now, I don't think it was everything that this piece was capable of. And on that basis, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's a long way from where it should be. So this is also a no vote. Moving on, SCP-4788, Cash Cow by Malice Aforethought. Our pitch here is that we've got an anomalous taxidermied corpse, an anomalous cadaver, and every so often it undergoes an event where it basically grows a bunch of shit out of itself. We throw in a lot of different body horror, and we sort of hint that this stuff, this growth is sort of bovine in nature, but really messed up bovine. And, there's all sorts of acid that dissolves things. And as we go towards the end, we reveal a little bit that each of the stomachs, the between 6 and 36 stomachs connected to a muzzle on the exterior of the thing, contains a little bit of British coinage. And the original stomach has a paycheck inside it. And we reveal at the end that this provisional site is the steakhouse where the cadaver used to work. And we sort of end it with the restaurant was closed 3 days after the skip was discovered, and he was still on the payroll. And we end it there. What we have is not entirely obvious, believe it or not, by my elevator pitch, what's going on. And what I mean is that I don't fully understand the relationship between all of the growths and stuff on this thing and the workplace, if the intention was that it would this thing would grow stakes. If you played The Sims 3 and you pine for your own stake plant, which you could grow with a good amount of gardening skill, maybe we've got something like that this thing, would grow some sort of like prime cuts or something that, we would have some reason for this thing to be hidden. But I don't think that's it, because a lot of the new body parts and stuff that we mentioned, none of it is really along those lines. So it's not clear to me why this is what it is and how it connects to the place of work, because we saved that for the end quite intentionally to be the big hook. But how we get from A to B from a narrative perspective is a little muddy. We make note that people around the cadaver, while it's doing all this stuff, report that they hear the sounds of cutlery and laughter and muffled talking, and it's not obvious where it's coming from. It's all just, it's little pieces that altogether don't quite add up, and this is that really brutal part of things where, as obvious as you think you have to make it for your readers, you got to make it a little more obvious than that. Because I am convinced there is a story being told in the background here, but for whatever it's worth, on this day, I am not clever enough to decipher it. We also make mention that the acid and organic remnants during these events just disappear through unknown means. No waste is produced during these events, and it's just another inexplicable part of this. I don't think there's any reason to even have to do that. That we could have found this through, say the place collapsing or whatever. I think anytime you have to add something like that it disappears, or when you try to move it, it just remanifests. When we have to bring up things like that, I think it can weaken the piece, and it weakens it because you make the reader sort of ask those questions of where does it go, or how does it do that? And many times the answer isn't particularly relevant to the work, so you end up sort of splitting your reader's attention between the story you're wanting to tell and the details that ultimately don't buy you or them anything at all. If the idea was that the thing makes stakes, I think you had a good opportunity for some really disturbing horror by not necessarily making this a cadaver, by making this a living being that's having to experience all of this, and let the reader fill in the blanks that this poor bastard was basically being harvested by this steakhouse, particularly if you point out that this is all still attached, this is all muscle and so on, and it still hurts the host, if you will. I think that would have been something really stark and really make the reader kind of squick out with going about it that way. But as it is, we're so dry and so clinical, which is good, but I think some of the horror elements of it kind of fall by the wayside because of it, because we don't have any way to empathize or sympathize with a corpse. It's not really going to happen. So all that said, I don't think it's quite as on the nose as some of the comments make it out to be, because I feel like it is just a little too vague on what we're trying to get at. And again, it could be me. This has been a wild week. I will fully shoulder the blame if I've got the wrong of it and I'm just misreading it. But as it is, and as I'm reading it, I think a little additional clarity and a little more direction on how you want to get after the reader would have really elevated this. Moving on, SCP-4709, titled At the Risk of Sounding Repetitive by Mini-Meats, who has been a staunch friend and supporter of me through the last couple of weeks, and I feel that this is going to be poor repayment by no voting his skip, but at the same time, I don't think you really improve as a writer by having people tell you what you want to hear. It is more useful to get the lowdown on what people really think. And, if you can't trust your friends or, your close contacts to be honest with you, you are in danger of, weakening your own pieces. What I will say is that the procedures and the description were both outstanding. We leave some little hints of things that are going to be very important in the work. In the procedures, in particular, this 1967 Frank Sinatra rendition of "The Girl from." That's interesting. I sort of half read it all this time. It's supposed to be "The Girl from Ipanema," but it's Inapima. Is that? Wow. Anyway, we use that as sort of a leitmotif in the piece, that when the song is visible, scary shit happens. And we, sort of set that out in the beginning, that when our shit can detect it, we evacuate, we get the hell out. The description is also good at setting up the twist at the end. Our introduction to Dash 2, sort of at the very end of the line. I also really like that we have this concept of, while you're within this temporal and spatial instability, all sorts of crazy shit happens, including involuntary ontokinesis, the involuntary ability to bend reality, which is pretty cool. I don't think I've ever seen that before. I like that we have that this hotel basically appeared 3 days after breaking ground on it. That basically, could you imagine the fucking debacle that would happen? Like, I've been involved in big builds like this, where you've got all these different teams have to be involved, and all of a sudden 3 days in, the whole fucking thing's done. Like, the utter shit show that the Foundation would have to clean up just in hushing that whole incident up is far bigger than most people would think it to be, just because of how involved construction is. Furthermore, I like how in the middle of these exploratory logs, we note that we tried to send in drones due to safety concerns, but they're not fucking working. So I like that we did basically understand we've got some scary shit going on. We've got potential casualties. So let's try the drones again. Let's not, just throw that whole idea out. Our drones are pretty good. But they didn't work. And just that little note, just that little paragraph, I think does add a good deal to the overall immersion and sort of understanding how the Foundation was going about their business with this location. So I've been giving the thing a lot of praise. So why is it ultimately a no vote? Well, the bulk of the narrative happens over the course of these exploration logs. They are quite lengthy. This is a very lengthy skip, and I don't think the build up to payoff ratio is remotely correct. I think we spend too much time on things that were more of sort of, it's more scene building, as though we're sort of, trying to read an action movie or a horror movie. The trouble is, not all of these little pieces do anything from a narrative perspective. I don't glean anything other than trying to build a more clear picture with the mind's eye. We spend a lot of time with people talking and not necessarily advancing the story. And that is something I don't think we can afford to do, given what our Dash 2 is, that they speak very cryptically, and they're not remotely relatable. They're not anything that the reader could understand or identify with. And that is, I think, a missed opportunity, because that is probably your best shot of correcting that ratio without doing anything else, is make this, make this person in the center of this thing, make them something that that will land with the reader. The temporal shenanigans and the MTFs getting mulched, in sort of a 1-2 punch, has been done a fair bit lately, and that doesn't aid the piece either. But we did sort of, I like that we did get through a full loop narratively in, right at the beginning. Our end, it basically happens from a different perspective. So I like the, I appreciate the motives, but the methods were not, I don't think they were quite right. The thing is just altogether a little bit longer than it needs to be, and that given our payoff, it's longer than it really has a right to be. So how do you fix this? Well, you've got sort of two different groups that have been going through this crazy hotel, and the one isn't really reliant on the other. You could basically get rid of half of that whole interaction and make the piece a fair bit more compact. And at the end of the day, the story is not terribly impacted by it. We lose some of the visuals, if you will, but at the same time, that visual time is more stuff that I think you have to justify with your payoff. And like I said, the other big thing I think is identifying what we can do to improve this final guy, this -2. Can we, what sort of things can we do to really hook the reader, to make them like, oh my God, like, it just, you need that moment, especially when the piece is this long. Overall, absolutely nothing out and out wrong with the piece, but the length is not justified by the story. So that is where I'm at with this. This is a no vote. Moving on, SCP-4581, titled Anti-Racist Audiocassette, and I'm going to take a stab at this name, Sir Selle. This is a first-timer piece, and it is the high skip of the week at plus 75 at the time of this recording. It's had a few extra days than a skip normally would to increase that figure, but all that said, it's still, this is a pretty good piece. It is, however, in an area that I've never been a huge fan of. Your elevator pitch for this thing would be that it is an audio cassette that is a Gamers Against Weed artifact, whereby playing it, it will play basically the most inappropriate copyrighted song that it could in that moment. Given that pitch, I would say, by all means, tell me more. So the way this is structured is sort of interesting. We have a long description. We have a full page height worth of description, sort of laying out how the thing works. It is basically, as I said, it will play like the most inappropriate copyrighted thing that it can, and then on the back side, it has sort of an opposing effect that it will silence communication and scrub audio within 300 meters. But we also introduced this sort of inexplicable info hazard that will somehow, given this is an audio cassette and thus analog, manage to infect and sort of transmit itself on digital files available on a network. This is, we had to do it for the sake of the story, but I really, like, my IT senses, like, fucking went berserk at this, that, it works somehow. It's so wide open that I'm like, I have a hard time like buying it under any circumstances, but it is what it is, and it is an important part of the piece. So you kind of have to take it and go. We have a test log. We have entries from a Foundation researcher that screwed up and infected all their shit. The important thing with this piece, to my knowledge, and this is pending what happens in week 43 and week 44, this is the first time I have seen a skip within the article make explicit mention of its disruption class and what actions were taken to upgrade it in response to new information that was found about the entity. It's an interesting little advancement in that whole anomaly classification system. We have logs, chat logs from different GAW members. It's the whole gamut of stuff is here. We've got internal memos. We've got interviews, between the researchers and our, main POI for this piece. It's for a first timer entry. This is super ambitious. This is one of the best first time pieces I have seen this year. The final interview really does sort of tie things together in understanding how the thing works, why it was conceived, and we have a little interesting interaction between the Foundation and this POI, and that's great. But before we get there, we have a lot of stuff that is less, it all goes to the piece, and I'm not saying that it does not. But again, when we talk about build up to payoff, we every time we add another thing, another log, another little thing of explaining how the thing works, or going through understanding how we can contain it, all of the length, everything we do, every word, every line, we have to make our ending that much more impactful. The piece was such that the author actually then stuck a tail in at the end of it to sort of continue the story. So I applaud the ambition, and I applaud the attention to detail, because in the comments, the author made a post and went in, explained things, and it really does show the amount of effort and attention to detail that was put into it. But that said, I stand by my assertion. It is longer than the payoff justifies, and that is the hardest part of this writing process. Once you understand the basics and how to do the basic storytelling that the Foundation fans expect, it is getting that ratio right. And this is unfortunately not there. It has good moments, but not enough of them, and not to the level to fully justify its length, much less the tale that accompanies with it and continues the story. There are also a number of cross links in here, a ton of them actually, and that is something that some people are not going to be big fans of that. I appreciate it from the perspective of that you have obviously done your homework. You are, a fan of the works all over the place, not just, the typical Series 1 darlings, but there's links to, to GOI hubs and to different pieces out of like Series 3 and other tales. There's a lot of good to this piece, but when you are writing something of this sort of length, be prepared for some people to say this was too long for the story you were trying to tell. Moving on, a translation piece, SCP-055-PT. This is from our Portuguese branch, originally written and translated by /Anmu. This is a very odd sort of piece in that if you asked me to pitch it, I would tell you it's an anomalous item. It's Foundation made, but it's an anomalous item. We don't really have much of a story to tell in it. And on that note, I have very little to say about it. Where what we have is basically at the very end, as we talk about our two particular instances, we can try to sort of insert a bit of story into it, but we have to sort of go about it on our own. If the piece was not a translation piece and this was a typical EN main lister, I don't know what the response would be. I don't have a clue, because there's no other way to say it. There's no story. There's when we talk about rising action, falling action, there's no action. We spend the entire thing basically explaining these suits, these how do you even describe them? AI powered body armor that, the AI has something of a personality and a relationship with the person operating the armor. There's simply not enough there for me to give any sort of meaningful judgment on it, because I feel like this, and perhaps this is simply just a cultural difference. Like, this is the sort of thing that the Portuguese branch is really into, and that is always interesting when we see it come across to the English wiki, what sort of things the other branches get up to. But it is not the sort of thing that I am personally into, and it's not enough for me to have an opinion either way on it. So it's a very simple no vote on that basis. Last but not least here, SCP-4742, titled A Job Well Done by Tupac Official. So structurally, this thing is interesting. We present it through a series of revisions, and we present it as a safe class object. In Japan, a little plastic statue from Doraemon, which I guess is an anime. Probably, right? Anyway, it produces these red bean paste pancakes, 100 of them a day, despite not looking like it actually has any means to do so. So it violates the law of conservation of mass. And I like that we have a very chopped explanation of that's why it's anomalous. Like, we don't know where the hell these pancakes are coming from. And we have this little thing at the end that says, the Chaos Insurgency raided one of our sites, and this thing was lost, but efforts to relocate it are low priority. And then we do an offset thing where we go to the next revision, and all of a sudden the thing is no longer safe. It's a Keter, and it doesn't immediately look like we're even talking about the same skip at all. But since we are doing this like version history thing, the offset explains quite a bit that the insurgency knew a little something we didn't. Now, somehow, after the insurgency got a hold of this thing, they unleashed absolute hell. This thing is like some super crazy reality bender that it bypasses Hume levels and does not respond to Scranton reality anchors. And this is the sort of thing that, as we sort of set up these tropes, every so often I think it's okay to violate them, to say, nope. Your Scranton reality anchors don't do a goddamn thing against this thing. You have to be careful with that, because it sort of cheapens it for everybody. Once in a blue moon, I think it's acceptable, but use it sparingly. But all of a sudden, all hell's broken loose. This thing is really, really bad news. We have a little bit of crazy to death going on in the little hidden letter behind a collapsible in this offset that I'm not honestly a big fan of. It is, I don't think it buys us much, honestly. We already know crazy shit's happening, and we've already established further up that we're compromised in some manner. So I don't think we did enough to justify having this weird like crazy to death thing. It feels tacked on. It feels cliched in a bad way. We go to another offset, and it's basically, this is it. This is an XK. The Veil protocol set to be lifted in the next 20 minutes. And then you have a little thing at the bottom. The document's been updated in the last 5 minutes. Do you want to see it? And you click it, and then we're at the end, and now the thing is back to a safe class skip. So what happened? Well, when right as we were about to revoke the Veil Protocol, this thing basically launched itself. We thought it was going to be some sort of nuke or end of the world type thing. It landed in some spot in Japan, and all of a sudden, we have our original little guy, our original little safe class, just back making pancakes. And we end it there, because its behavior is now identical to its behavior prior to being seized by the insurgency, and that's where we end the article. There are some things about this that make me scratch my head, mostly that we are okay with reclassifying this thing as safe in its final state. I don't understand why we would do that, given how we just established like how much this thing could be used for evil, and that we basically have not we stored it again in a low security containment locker. It doesn't mesh with, like, the Foundation's not stupid. Like, it's not great for anybody to position them as such. Like, we didn't just forget all this happened, because we have our history. So I have a major gripe with how this thing ends, and that is where my no vote comes from, because otherwise the thing is good. No one piece of it is any longer than it needs to be. I've said my piece on the little letter. I don't care for them. But it's how we end this thing. Like, come on, we're like, I'm supposed to be understanding that we're doing the right thing. We have so many resources at our disposal. Why are we just practically ended the world with this thing? Why is it in a low security containment locker? It just, yeah, you get it. That said, that doesn't seem to be stopping a lot of people. This thing is at plus 55 with not a lot of discussion on it, which I found interesting. If I'm missing something, please let me know. But if I'm not, I don't think I am. I just, I can't upvote it with the way we've set up the Foundation at the end here. Beyond that, it's a great piece, but I cannot get around how we treat ourselves at the last here. So that's 8 skips up and 8 down. I'm really, really relieved to get through a week. This has been a really wild past few weeks, and I appreciate all the support. I've had so many people, wishing for the best and backing me on this. I've mentioned, I don't know if I've even mentioned it on Cafe proper, but getting through this thing on a weekly basis has been really challenging, but incredibly gratifying, because I've been dealing for a long time with anxiety, particularly as it pertains to commitments and scheduled commitments. When I was facing having to take week 43 off, there was a real question of if I would ever record the show again. I am glad that it didn't come to that, and that I'm able to kind of get back to it, get a show out there. It's a little different show this week, but it's a show. Tomorrow, we're able to do some reading. Week 46, going to go on schedule. Going to have Friday. It's going to be a good time. So I'll see you in a couple of days. Week 46, I'll have a little bit of news to share with you. And until then, keep reading, keep writing. I'll see you on the other side.